Welcome to the second hour of Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and as I like to do almost every week, I like to invite Daniel McAdams with me. Welcome, Daniel. It's good to have you with me again.
Thanks so much, Jay. It's great to be back with you.
Always good to talk to you about what's going on around the world for a different perspective rather than the one that we get in the mainstream media every day. We are sort of told what to think, and everybody is thinking alike, and so it must be true, right? No, I think it's probably more likely that if everybody is thinking alike, nobody is thinking. And so what we like to do on this show is to bring in alternative views that are consistent with my values, the values that I have that I think are largely in sync with the founding fathers of our country, and that is personal liberty. As Ron Paul said in one of the debates when he was running for president, he thought maybe it would be a good idea to follow the golden rule. Let's treat others as we would have them treat us. And I remember he didn't get such a great response. I thought that was sort of strange coming from a Republican audience that I thought might be more God-fearing and believing in certain very solid principles of right and wrong. But in any event, that I know is what you believe and what your boss believes, the idea that we ought to treat other people as we would like to be treated. And I don't think that even sort of enters into the equation in the thinking of our military-industrial complex. Do you, Daniel?
Well, it's hard to know what they're thinking. It's hard to, project ourselves into their minds. Maybe in their own twisted way, they think that the interventions, the killing, and the bombing is all for the greater good. But people have thought that way throughout history, and there sure are a lot of skulls that are stacked up on that kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, indeed, and it really seems to be, if you talk to some people from different parts of the world, especially people that live in the Middle East, they get a picture of Christianity and the United States in a way that isn't very favorable, and it certainly isn't necessarily the way I perceive Christianity to be, but that's another topic. I would like to just hit on a couple of things that are going on now as we're speaking today, Daniel. Obama he's got the guns a-blazing there to try to stop ISIS. He's declared war on ISIS, and how much is that going to cost the American people? Do you have any sense of what the dollars might cost, not to mention what it might cost in terms of lives?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would have to almost question the question because I'm not convinced that he's at war with ISIS. I'm not big on conspiracy theories, but from all appearances, this seems to be less a war on ISIS and more a war for regime change in Syria that we didn't get last year. But let's take it for face value. Let's assume that they're not lying to us this time about their real motives. And take a look at it. And we ran a piece earlier this week, or actually late last week, just a little bit of a commentary based on an article that Professor Linda Billnitz wrote in the Boston Globe last week. And you remember she's a professor and economist who wrote with Joe Stiglitz the $3 trillion war.
Uh-huh.
And of course, at the time they said, "Oh, this is ridiculous," not going to cost that much, and of course it's costing that much.
Sure.
But she had a very interesting piece where she took a look at the additional military spending for the year that will be required to make up for this war on ISIS, and she took into account not just the direct money that will be spent. As your listeners know, we've apparently last week crossed $1 billion mark in our bombing of ISIS, which used to be a lot of money. I guess it's not these days, a few bombs. But she was talking about $22 billion a year just in direct spending. But she makes a very good point that you have to look at not just that, but the fact that, as you remember, all the talk of the so-called sequester, which would have decreased the increase of military spending, not decreased spending.
Right.
But the sequester, the drawdown of some spending after, the war on terror, after Iraq and Afghanistan, all of these things are now completely off the table, and the Pentagon is gearing up for more general spending, a higher general budget. And so she adds those things in, and also she adds in the additional spending for foreign military assistance, because as she points out, most of the time when these so-called partners get involved in one of our adventures, we end up putting the bill for it.
Huh.
So when she puts all this together, she said we're looking at about $100 billion more spent on military activities than we expected in this year alone. So that, to me, that sounds like a chunk of money. I don't know to most people, but I wonder if when the propagandists were scaring the heck out of every American that there was an ISIS waiting to behead them under their bed, if they had told them that it's going to cost $100 billion this year alone, and never mind the opportunity cost of all that money, and never mind all the malinvestment, and never mind the damage to the dollar, I wonder if they had had a rational, if they had had some time to assess it rationally, if they would have said, please, Obama, start bombing, please do this immediately, which is what they seem to be saying.
Yeah, it isn't. We aren't very rational when it comes to these things, Daniel. You know, I was last evening was screening a film called We Are Many. It had to do with the protest against us going into Iraq in 2003, and they pointed out that well over 1 million Iraqis have died since that war began. And yes, we've had a couple of beheadings, and they're horrible things to behold. But the point is that it's two. You know, they're two dead people. Tragic as it is, somehow the fact that some reporters got their heads lopped off, a couple of them, they lost their lives. What about the 1.2 million people that have lost their lives in Iraq? What about many more people, of course, Americans that have been killed in combat, not to mention the loss of limbs. And, it's just, to me, it's just totally irrational the way we're behaving. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So cost, who cares about the cost? We just print more dollars, right? Until we can't anymore.
They say who cares about the cost? We're doing it to keep us safe. But hold on, that's what they said about Iraq. We got to invade Saddam to keep us safe. Not only did it not make us safe, it made us a lot more threatened, at least according to what they're claiming. It was their invasion that created ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Nusra Front and all of this. It's a direct result of what they said they were doing to protect us.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of a shame that a lot of people still fell for their lies. You know, we had a lot of people even commenting on our Facebook page for the Ron Paul Institute that, hey, I'm all for non-interventionism, but this is one of the times that it's warranted. And so they can still do that old magic. You know, they can still drum up some of that fear and stir it in the cauldron and get people excited. And you know, I'd like to wish that wasn't the case, but I guess humans being humans, they know how to manipulate. Our intelligence agencies spend, billions and billions of dollars researching how to manipulate opinion. So we're supposed to think they're not going to use it on us. You know, of course they do.
You know, Daniel, if anything, it seems like we have a growing menace inside our country as a result of what we're doing overseas. There seems to be, my impression is there's a growing sort of number of Americans that might be, tempted to go in the direction of ISIS or in the direction of some radical Islamic participation that we didn't used to hear much, if anything, about. But if anything, it seems like we are now much more endangered domestically here as a result of this anger that's growing up inside our country. Would you agree with that?
No, I think that's a good point. And people like Ron Paul and many of the rest of us, and I know you said it too. I mean, warned in the beginning that this, fight against ISIS, the way they're doing it. I know Michael Sawyer talked about it extensively. The fight against ISIS, the way they're doing it, it only guaranteed to serve as a recruiting tool for more ISIS.
Right.
And even badder guys like the Khorasan group and all of these scary demonic monsters that they keep telling us are out there. If they are indeed out there and they have all the ill will that they're told they have, then then what we're doing is simply emboldening them, giving them great PR and marketing for new recruits. So, I mean, I don't believe that everyone in Washington is that stupid, or that groupthink has taken such a hold that nobody's capable of saying, hey, wait a minute. But I do have to wonder what is going on, what they are thinking out there.
You mentioned a minute ago that you're not sure that Obama is really serious about defeating ISIS. Did I hear you correctly? And if so, why? Why do you say that?
Well, first of all, the whole idea that we're going to have this antiseptic war where we don't dare get our feet on the ground and get dirty, we'll just push buttons from a bunker in Mexico and drone them, or we'll send our otherwise useless B-1 bombers over there to bomb them and this sort of thing, and that somehow that will achieve some sort of victory, which they've never explained what victory will look like.
Yeah.
The idea that this could happen in the first place, just from a military perspective, if you look at people who know about these things, they say it's an absurd fantasy. But even if you look at behavior on the ground, it seems awfully strange to me. You know, this recent Kurdish town in northern Syria, which is being, as we speak, taken over by ISIS. The U.S. clearly had to have detected the movement of these ISIS forces over the desert to get to this town, Kobani, and yet they did nothing. They didn't bomb them as they were out in the open desert. And as soon as they got into the town, well, there's a few 100,000 people living there. You can't start dropping bombs on these people. So now they've taken over, 40, 50% of the town. They're ensconced in the town, and there's not a darn thing that we can do about it. The Turks refused to take any action because they didn't want to do anything to help the Kurds. They wouldn't even let the Kurds in Turkey cross over and help fight. So, if anything, and if you look at in Iraq, the ISIS is not only are they not being defeated, they're actually making more progress. They're within striking distance, almost, of the Baghdad International Airport. They are moving closer to the so-called green zone, to our huge Vatican City-sized embassy and all the Iraqi government offices. They're making more progress, and this is not doing a darn thing to stop them. So I don't know if any plan could work. Certainly not a military plan, but this one sure doesn't seem to be working. And if you look at over the weekend, there were plenty of articles for people who are interested to Google, including a great one by Alexander Coburn about how the Obama strategy for ISIS is absolutely in ruins. It's a total disaster. So people are starting to say this now. I think I even saw something in the Washington Post about the fact that this whole thing is falling apart before it even really started.
Mm.
So
if they wanted to, go ahead, Daniel.
No, go ahead, please.
No, so if they wanted to, they could have stopped ISIS when they were in the open desert. But they didn't bomb them.
Everyone was wondering. Yeah, everyone was wondering why aren't they being bombed when they're approaching this town? Why is nothing happening?
Right.
And maybe there's a great reason. I'm not a military strategist.
Yeah.
But I'm just a guy. I'm just a layman. But it seems like it's an awful lot harder if you're going to conduct war by bombing alone after you've let them already infiltrate a city and have a few 100,000 people hostage.
Yeah.
Can
you think of any geopolitical reasons why? I mean, it seems to me it's such a mess there. When if you go after one group, you're going to alienate another, and so is there some reason that we would want to be nice to these guys that are lopping off our heads?
Well, I don't know that they're being nice to them, but the U.S. is under an enormous amount of pressure from both Turkey and Saudi Arabia to focus more on the Kurds and to focus more on taking out Assad. This was, according to many different reports, this was Turkey's requirement for getting involved. And we hear on Monday this week that the Turkish government has just agreed to allow U.S. military to use the Incirlik air base to launch strikes on Iraq and Syria, which is a first. This just happened yesterday. And And so Turkey is becoming involved, but reportedly the Turkish President Erdogan's requirements are that the U.S. focus its priority on taking out Assad, which, okay, if you want to fight ISIS, why would you take out the guy who's been fighting them for 3 years?
Yeah.
You know, if your goal really is to get rid of these people no matter what, because they're even worse than the worst thing you can imagine, why would the first thing you do be to take out the guy who's been fighting him? It makes no sense, even if you don't die. But Turkey wants us to take them out, to take out Assad. They want it to start by the U.S. Issuing a no-fly zone inside Turkey, which is extremely problematic, certainly legally, but also militarily. That would take away any facade that we're not really at war with Assad. You know, a no-fly zone would require the United States to shoot down the military of a sovereign country within its own territory with no Security Council approval, with no certainly legal approval in the United States. It would be unconstitutional, and it already is illegal, would be much more so if that were the case, if the U.S. were to issue a no-fly zone.
Do you think that would invite possibly the Russians to get involved?
I mean, despite what everyone says about the Russians, I think the Russians are extremely risk averse, and I think this is too hot a potato to handle. Plus, they really do want to get rid of ISIS. They are very concerned about Islamic terrorism. You know, they faced it in their own country, you know, a number of times have in the U.S. So I genuinely want ISIS taken out, and I don't think they want to have a big dust-up with the
Yeah. Well, what
last year?
What do you think, Daniel? What do you think the prospects of ISIS actually gaining control of Baghdad? What do you think the possibilities of that are?
I think they're pretty good. I mean, I think it's. I wrote a little something about it this week. That Kurt Nimmo, who writes for InfoWars, had a great tweet that I wanted to build a little post on because it was such a great little succinct statement that he wrote in a tweet. And I'll just quote it here for your listeners. It said, "ISIS will soon shut down Baghdad airport with anti-aircraft missiles provided by U.S. and Saudis."
Oh, isn't that nice?
How's that for irony? We're going to use our own weapons to shut down the airport in Baghdad, and who knows, move on beyond that.
Yeah, and what repercussions might that have then, Daniel, in the Middle Eastern, the whole equation there?
I hate to operate on gut hunches and things like that, but I don't know. I just have a feeling that things are unraveling very quickly, and that something really bad is about to happen.
Yeah.
I know that's not specific or good, solid analysis. It's just a gut feeling.
Sure.
But it's a feeling that they have bitten off something that they just can't chew, that they have stepped into a big mound of fire ants, and that something is going to get ugly very quickly.
Well, it definitely seems things are heating up, to say the least. And where does Israel stand in all of this? I mean, they must be getting nervous about it. Of course, Israel has nuclear weapons. Like, we never talk about that, but it's my understanding they're certainly able to take care of themselves, I would think.
Well, that would be a deterrent against state actors like Iran, but I don't think it's a deterrent to non-state actors.
Right.
Generation warfare, stateless actors. Nuclear weapons. What does some suicide bomber in the desert care about?
He doesn't care.
Weapons?
Yeah.
They should be more concerned, but what they're doing, and I think very foolishly, is they are following this idea that they want to overthrow Assad, so they are protecting a sliver of Syrian land beyond the Golan Heights, which of course is occupied by Israel. It's actually Syrian territory that the Israelis have occupied since 1967. But there's an additional corridor that Israel is providing air protection for, and that is an area where the Al-Qaeda allied Nusra Front is operating, and it's some have speculated it's to be the staging ground for a second front against Assad to march into Baghdad. So and we actually ran a piece last week commenting that the Israelis seem to be pursuing the same foolish policies that the U.S. is pursuing, which is arming and supporting radical Islamic groups, hoping that they'll take out our other enemies and then play nice with us afterward.
Yeah.
And that hasn't been the case in the past. We saw that our allies, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, were, at the very least, were involved with Al-Qaeda, involved with the Taliban and that sort of thing. So it's a pretty foolish game, but that seems to be the game that both Israel and the U.S. and, of course, a number of other countries in the region are playing.
Yeah. Well, none of it makes any sense to me unless there's something much bigger going on here that none of us seem to understand or realize what is taking place. You did mention to me that there's some developments and some things going on in Ukraine. It's been out of the news here for the most part. But can you give us a bit of an update on what's going on in the Ukraine right now?
Sure. I mean, there are a couple, I think, important things. One is that the Ukrainian government is absolutely bankrupt. They're completely out of money. They have not met the IMF terms for an additional tranche of loan money to come through. So they are in extraordinarily bad circumstances. And on earlier this week, on Monday, there was a demonstration in front of I believe it was in front of the Defense Ministry or one of these buildings of that nature. Just looking at the video of it a while ago, there were probably hundreds of, they looked like young conscripts who showed up at this protest in front of the military headquarters in their military uniforms, demonstrating because they're not getting paid and they're not being issued winter clothes.
Huh.
Winter uniforms, which is pretty important in a cold place like Ukraine. So the Ukrainian government is broke and it's not paying its young conscripts who are already battle-hardened by now from the fights in the east. So I wouldn't rule out something sparking up again in Kiev, maybe a new Maidan protest by some of these military people who will find out that what they've been told about what's happening in eastern Ukraine is not true. They've been sold a lie by their government, and when they get back home, not only are they not thanked, but they're not even paid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible because clearly, as you've explained on this show before, the Putin had given the Ukraine a much better deal than the West was going to give them. It would have enabled the country to survive in much better fashion than what they are having to go through now since the overthrow of the elected government, of the Ukraine, and so. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out here. I mean,
and the ultimate irony, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the ultimate irony of this whole thing is that the association agreement with the EU that this whole thing was about has been postponed indefinitely. So they're not getting what they said they were going to get from the West. Not only are they not getting what they were going to get from Russia, but they're not going to get the benefits they promised their people from the EU.
Wow.
So really, it's the worst of all worlds. So what a cruel joke on the Ukrainian people.
What is, as winter approaches now, what is the story? And there was a lot of concerns about Putin cutting off gas supplies to Europe. Is that something that's going to take place?
Well, I don't know that he's cutting off. I think they want to cut him off from selling.
Okay.
Europe. They think they can develop some alternatives, and it's a big geopolitical game that's being played with trying to manipulate, and that does have something to do with what's going on in Syria. Syria has been hesitant to allow an oil pipeline to go through its territory because that would bypass the Russian pipelines. So therefore, they don't want to cut the knees out from their ally by allowing that. So that's, of course, some people speculate that's one of the reasons why they want to see Assad overthrown. But I think Russia wants to sell oil to anyone who can pay, oil and gas, of course, natural gas to anyone who can pay. The problem is Ukraine has not paid. So it's, although, Assad, Putin is demonized as a monster for cutting this off. Well, the fact of the matter is anyone who doesn't pay for a product would expect to not receive that product.
Right.
So
exactly.
If you go to Walmart and put something in your pocket and walk out, you don't get to keep it. So
yeah, Exactly. So, but the propaganda here, and just as I was implying that that it was going to be Putin that cut off the Europe from the gas supplies. In fact, it would be us, but we would want to point the finger, though. Our propagandists would want to point the finger at Putin. It's Putin's fault. It's not us that is denying gas supplies to Europe. It would be Putin. It wouldn't be our side.
And if you did it, it would be a dumb move, a very dumb move. But because anytime I think you cut trade, you do terrible harm. Trade is peaceful, promotes peace and prosperity. So if you did do that, it would be foolish. However, the U.S. has placed all kinds of sanctions on Russia, the U.S. and the EU, and it's all okay and everything. But whenever the victim of sanctions does anything, look how it just proves how bad they are, Whereas in reality, sanctions on all sides are foolish, counterproductive measures that do not lead to peace, but actually lead to war.
Well, it doesn't seem as though we're doing very many things that make a lot of sense, at least from where I sit here in New York City. I don't understand our foreign policies. I don't understand any of this. It doesn't make any sense, and I don't know. One thing I'd like to ask you about, and I don't know if you're prepared to opine on this or not, Daniel, but one of the things Obama was pushing through was this Trans-Pacific Partnership. Do you have any idea, is that moving forward? Is that going to be rammed through the Senate, or how? Do you have any knowledge about that?
I don't know the very latest about that, but I know in general, anytime you see something with a title like that, you can guess that it's bad. You can guess that it's managed trade,
right?
From well-connected corporations. You can guess that there's a lot of U.S. Manipulation. You can guess that there will be a lot of exemptions made for U.S. corporate interests, and all of these things that go along, in NAFTA and all these trade agreements. So that there's nothing good in it. Trade is it's beautiful because it's so simple. It's just trying to get together. It's exchanging one for the other without being subsidized or sanctioned by any involved party.
Yeah. Well, it's really at the heart of freedom, the ability to exchange goods and services freely without being restricted and imposed. So, I mean, that's really at the heart of what America was supposed to be about when we were first formed. And Washington, our first president, didn't want us to have any of these involvements with other foreign lands, only to trade and to do things that would be mutually beneficial to everyone. So I know that's what the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity is all about, and would encourage my listeners to go there to the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity and to donate from time to time. It would be a big help to help get the real story out about what's going on in geopolitics, as opposed to the propaganda that we are being given day in and day out here by our mainstream press. Anything else you'd like to add this week before we discontinue our discussion?
Well, I'm sorry to depress everyone, but keep your eye on Turkey and Syria, because I think we're going to see some significant developments over the next few days or week.
All right. Well, it's not really something we want to hear. We'd like to see less war and more trade. But I want to thank you again, Daniel, for being with us and sharing your insights with our listeners.
Thank you so much, Jay.